So I'll just by way of intro, kia ora katoa, nui mai, haere mai. I'd like to welcome Ruth Herbert, who's my first podcast interviewee. So it's great to have you along, Ruth. And so this is a bit of a trial run, so hopefully it goes well.
Me too.
So just by way of background, Ruth has been involved for many years in advocating, writing, researching and working in the area of sexual violence and all forms of harm to individuals in and out of the house. And she's written extensively, and I've had a look at some of her work, and she's clearly an expert in this whole area and of violence and child abuse and neglect, which is a huge problem in New Zealand, and is very focused on evidence-based work so that we can have a basis to try and solve this huge problem. And she's done a lot of work with the Productivity Commission, with submissions, and the Backbone Collective in terms of mental health and addiction, which is something I write about in the book. So without further ado, I'd like to just ask Ruth to introduce herself and provide us with a bit of info on your background and your interests.
Thank you, Clive, and Morena. Yes, my interest started, in fact, nearly 40 years ago when I escaped a very violent domestic situation with two small children, and found myself then for years after that struggling against the system, struggling to keep myself and the children safe, struggling to help the children overcome, and myself to overcome, the trauma we'd experienced. And I quickly saw how easy it would be for that whole cycle to repeat through my children. So early on, I got a determination not to, or to do everything I could to prevent those behaviours, those experiences from repeating in my children's life as they grew up. And I guess that's been, from my personal, my parental focus ever since.
Yes.
But it started me thinking, it of course led me to meet many other people and started me to see all of these interrelationships of multiple, what I just think of as multiple social issues, or health and social issues we could call it, that all cluster together and that one experience leads to another. But it was some years after that before I felt that I had processed my own experience to the point where I could work in this field. So prior to immersing myself in the domestic and sexual violence field, I worked for many years in the health sector, doing a lot of implementation work, really, a lot of strategy and evaluation. But my real interest and expertise was in setting up new systems, making change happen in the health sector. And a lot of that work started in the post-Cartwright inquiry, when it was very much the sort of new focus on the patient rights, etc. Even earlier than that, I came from a background in community work. And so I brought all of that together with me nearly 20 years ago when I started doing this work in domestic and sexual violence, as you said. And yes, that's, I guess, the journey I've been on and that I still find myself on.
Yes. No, it's interesting. So you've been in the trenches, so to speak, and you can speak firsthand on these issues.
I bring to all my work, not just my experience, but of course over the years I've communicated, literally it must be thousands now of women,
yes,
who have had the lived experience, and
yes.
I do think it's a really important component is to ground the work that we do in
Yeah.
the lived experience of people that need the services and need the support.
Yes, and I suppose for someone like me, it's difficult to understand the gravity of the situation, because I grew up in a very loving family, and I've never experienced any form of abuse, domestic or otherwise, or violence. So, but I just know intrinsically how bad it is and how harmful it is. And I suppose I look at the evidence, but I don't have that lived feeling or that lived experience like a lot of women, particularly and children in New Zealand, do.
Yeah, and it is really quite impossible to imagine.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to explain, I guess.
Yes.
You know, the United Nations, I think it was, coined the phrase of intimate terrorism for domestic violence, and
Yes.
that really does capture it. If you could, people think about what it would be like to be a victim of terrorism.
Yeah.
Yes. It is, and it's very hidden, as are many of these other social issues. And I think
Yes.
that's the point of the discussion, that
Yes.
that none of them just occur in isolation from the other.
No.
We can't think, we have to stop thinking about them as individual sort of silos of social issues.
Yes.
Because very rarely, in fact, I'm not sure if I've ever come across anybody who's only experienced one of these multitude of issues.
Yes.
And some of them, I guess, I work from the premise that, or from the evidence, in fact, is clear that some of them are sort of co-occurring. Some of them are consequences of other social issues that have occurred, and some of them that go on to cause other social issues.
Yes.
So there's sort of this horizontal and vertical, this multiplicity of issues occurring.
Yes.
That again makes it more complicated, more complex to unpick and to understand.
Yeah, so it's more like a cluster. It's like a cluster of phenomena or circumstances that feed off each other.
It's like a never-ending changes, a never-ending mix, if you like. I mean, the Great Australian studies showed that the greatest cause of homelessness to women in Australia is domestic violence. We don't often think about that.
No.
You know, we talk about homelessness as if it's separate without.
Yes.
Alcohol and drug abuse, we talk about as if it's a phenomena that somebody suddenly starts abusing substances.
Yes.
But the vast majority of people that abuse substances have unresolved trauma.
Yes.
And you can't just try and treat the substance abuse unless you go back and treat the unresolved trauma.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's the essence of where we're going wrong, if you like. We're trying to treat these in a linear, you know, almost medical model, you know, find a treatment for one issue.
Yes.
Without looking at the whole package.
Yes. And I suppose in a way in my book, what I've tried to do is really try and understand the interconnection or interlinkage between some of these you know, issues that we're talking about. And I suppose I fear sometimes that maybe I've bitten off too much, that I've tried to do too much. But could you tell me, you know, how you came across my book and what you make of it as someone who's, you know, who knows this area?
Well, the first question, how I came across it, I guess, is because after all this work in domestic and sexual violence, and through that sort of last 20 years, it became clearer to me that we were never going to be able to address domestic and sexual violence unless and until we were also addressing all of these other issues. Because we'd be, you know, fixing the broken leg when the rest of the body's still bleeding, sort of thing. And so this concept of well-being I mean, I watched the previous administration with the issue of social investment and some of the earlier productivity commission. And then, of course, this concept of well-being got bubbled more and more to the surface. And it seems like as useful a phrase as any to sort of capture this notion that all of these social issues are related. And I've thought and read and written for myself and written for an advocate, anyone else who'll listen, on this notion. And so when I saw your book, it was simply this word of well-being that jumped out, and I thought, oh, let's see what this chap has to say about well-being. And I think you have bitten off, you know, an awful lot to try and fit into one book.
Yes.
And congratulations for even attempting that. And I mean, I think this is a good point to say that I want to recognize that I would hate in this corridor around well-being for us to lose the other sort of legs of the stool, if you like to use sort of your metaphor, of well-being. It is not just the health and social issues. There's also the environmental and the economic and, you know, climate change and all of these other matters that come together to influence the well-being of individuals and whānau and society more broadly. But where my interest and expertise is very much in the health and social leg of the stool, so to speak.
Yes, because I've sort of broken it into those two categories of getting by and getting ahead, and saying we need both parts to work together. We can't just get by in life, you know. But I suppose in a way your focus has been on getting by. In other words, just surviving. So for some people, getting by is an achievement in itself.
Oh,
huge
totally.
achievement.
On a daily basis, on an hourly basis.
Yes.
It's just getting by, just surviving.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know, for all of us, we aspire to actually then be able to build our lives and evolve, you know, take ourselves to greater things. But there are huge obstacles to overcome, and we could talk about that, you know, and take all day. You know, that is the complexity of just this one sort of cluster of domestic and sexual violence. And then if you start talking about all of the others, you know, it's massive. The challenges that face individuals who find themselves in this, you know, sort of dastardly situation of struggling. And most people just, it's as you say, most people who haven't had that lived experience, just it's impossible for them to understand how tough it is, how debilitating these conditions make life for individuals.
Yes, because I suppose you're trapped, and the difficulty is to know how to get out of that trap intact, because the risk, of course, is that you're, you know, the perpetrator is going to find you, as many do, unfortunately, and that you can't just walk out the door with your kids.
Oh, absolutely. Well, in fact, the law doesn't allow you to at New Zealand. As the judge said to me, you know, he has a right to know where his children are living. No matter about my right to stay safe.
Yes.
You cannot. That is a complete misnomer. That you could just say, you know, well, honey, this relationship isn't working. Let's divide the cutlery. I am here, you know. No way. Once you're in this situation, you know, you are. There is no escape, and that's why many women stay. It's safer to stay than to leave, and that's tragic. That is tragic to say in a first world country that it is safer for women and children to stay in abusive relationships than it is to leave. And that's at the essence of this well-being and this notion of bringing the, you know, 15% or whatever the percent is that are struggling the most up, focusing on their needs.
Yes.
You know, to have a society where everybody's going about their business today, while there is a percentage of the population struggling to this extent to survive and stay safe.
Yes.
House themselves and feed themselves, etc., etc.
Yes.
It is just such a sad indictment on us as a country.
Because I wrote about the sexual violence joint venture, and I interviewed Jan Logies, if you've read that, and I was a bit disappointed because I kept asking them if they had any data to support what they were doing, and they were rather evasive. And I suspect they don't have a lot of data. And they said, well, look, there's going to be this audit, in a couple of months, and that, why don't you wait for that? But the audit wasn't very positive about progress to date. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I have quite a lot of thoughts. I think one of the, or perhaps the best way for me to talk to this, I think one of the obstacles to us addressing this whole issue, this umbrella notion of well-being, is that successive governments continue to try and make it happen from the centre.
Yes.
And Amy Adams said to me once in a meeting, well, we can't do all of those things. We have to get our own house in order first. And I'm thinking, so all of these people are suffering terribly. This intergenerational cycle continues.
Yes.
While central government sector of Wellington tries to get their own house in order.
Yes.
And that sort of phrase has stuck with me. But I think it is the old model, the old sort of colonialist, patriarchal, top-down model, if you like,
yes.
that if you get a bunch of people together in Wellington, they can come up with the answers, and then they can sort
yes.
of spread out on society.
Yes.
And so, and this increasing recognition now and acceptance of the multiple social issues, and the fact that in Wellington they traditionally work in silos. All of those issues are planned and policies developed in silos. So the joint venture was about trying to join these things together.
Yes.
But they're still just joining them together for domestic and sexual violence. They're not joining with alcohol and drug abuse, or homelessness, or crime rate, or failure at school, or all of these other multiple issues. They're still in their own silos. And the place that I think they need to be joined together is not in Wellington, but is in the community.
Yes.
The whole model needs to be turned on its head, and then to join things together at a local level, because that's where people are needing to access it. So there's nothing wrong with what they're trying to do in principle with the joint venture, but an awful lot of money and time is being spent trying to do this in Wellington without, instead of getting on. I, as you can tell by my voice, I see this sense of urgency, because every year we simply see thousands more people, women, men, children, pouring into this whole pool of disadvantage, if you like.
Yes.
Or getting further and further away from a state of well-being.
Yes.
It's not a static cohort that's coming through. Every year, it spreads. Think of COVID. Every year, this is spreading like an infectious illness.
So the problem is to get the support and the funding to the people that need it, isn't it? I mean, that's the task that we have to deal with, and that's what I tried to, I thought Bill English's idea of dealing with the most disadvantaged first actually made a lot of sense. And
absolutely.
I mean, I spoke to him, and he's really, you know, he's totally committed to that concept still. And I mean, he said to me that the $1 million babies are the biggest problem we've got in this country, and we can save so many lives and so much money in the process by dealing with them.
Yeah.
And that's the solution. And Emily Mason's work in terms of, you know, getting that money to the needy. And I mean, when I interviewed her, I said, well, aren't you just going to be handing money out and there's going to be no, there's going to be no accountability? And she said, no, that if you can get the money to the local community, that they'll make sure it gets to the people that need it. So that I agree with you completely. We need to cut the bureaucracy out of it. Mm-hmm. Because they're self-serving. They have their own agendas. You know, and most of it is about keeping things the way they are.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And you know, I think I hadn't come across Emily Mason until I read your book, but I'm now a great fan. Everything that you report that she says, I would agree with, and I particularly like the graph at the bottom of about page 165 or 166. In fact, my favourite pages in the whole book are page 165 to 169. Okay, 5 pages just say it all for me.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that we need to be having a conversation about, and perhaps one thing that you didn't have an opportunity to really explore in the book, is yes, we need to increase the revenue spend on addressing these issues, but the savings, the huge savings that are possible. I mean, I don't think we talk about this enough, and her little graph shows beautifully.
I'll just show so people can see that
one there. And so the dotted line that goes up as you get, you know, further along, is the economic return. So
exactly,
you know, we know the studies have been done just on domestic violence, on family violence, that it's somewhere between $4 and $7 billion every year that it costs.
Yes.
So if there was no family violence, Grant Robertson would have had another between $4 and $7 billion in the budget. We talk all this talk in the media about how much he's allocating for this, that, and the other thing. But we are, as a country, pouring money into these social problems that if we didn't have them, or if we even had half of the cost drivers from these social problems that we have, we'd be a much wealthier economy.
Yes.
And I think it's the big question for
Ruth,
New Zealand. Do we want to keep pouring this money in, or do we want to address the issues themselves?
No one wants to pour this money into these issues, and no one wants to see the social harm we've got.
I'm just going to put my blind down.
How do we? What's your solution? Is it to have one ministry, have a ministry of deprivation, so to speak, and then local community groups that you know actually, you know, deal with the deprivation in their district? Is that going to be an option?
I think we just need. You talk about you know, needing a whole new approach to capitalism.
Yeah.
And I think there's been some writing done on. I'm a fan of the UK group who wrote Many to Many, talking about the need for a whole new relational state, where we move to a situation basically where the local level is driving it, and they are consulting with government. Whereas what we have now is that government consult with the community. It
Yes.
completely needs to be the other way around.
Yes.
It's not one or the other. We can't push it all out to the community and say, here, it's your problem. Both are codependent on each other.
Yes.
But we have to make the primary driver the community. And I
Yes.
think, that's a massive change. But others have thought about it. I mean, the the work that the Productivity Commission did on the more effective social services didn't seem to go anywhere, but it was great. Some of that was looking at exactly that. How do we move the decision making and the prioritization, if you like, of funding
Yes.
out to the community?
Yes.
So whether that then means that various communities are only having to communicate with one ministry in Wellington or 15 ministries, I'm a bit agnostic about. I think
Yes.
the more important thing is to empower local communities to decide what is needed and how best
Yes.
to support, enable, help, heal,
Yes.
and focus on those, as Bill English says, those in greatest need.
Yes.
If we try and lift every, the team of 5 million,
Exactly.
if we try and lift everybody's well-being at once, we'll still have the same huge inequalities that we have now. We have no choice
Exactly.
but to start
With the most needy, definitely.
and then build from that, and it'll take generations, because it took generations to create
Yes.
the situation we've got. There is no quick fix here. And I think that's one of the challenges. It needs a concerted long-term commitment and effort. We can no longer make these issues political footballs where, one comes in and changes something that the previous lot have done.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Because a stop-start approach is the last thing that those in need need to rebuild their lives. They need consistency and commitment.
Yes. So how would you envisage this working in a local community like your community up, Matakana,